Chapter 13 is comparison. So this chapter is going to examine comparison and contrast for your comparative and contrast papers. The quote for this chapter is, "There is no quality in the world that is not what it is merely by contrast. Nothing exists of itself." So what does this mean? Take a couple of minutes to figure out what this quote means. After that, do you agree with the quotation above, that nothing exists in itself, but rather by contrast? Explain what you think Melville meant in this quote. So in this chapter, there are a couple of learning outcomes. The first one is learning outcome 1, understanding comparison and contrast. What is comparison? What is contrast? Be able to discuss that in class. 2 is learning about reading strategies for comparison and contrast. 3, reading and reacting to a professional essay. 4, reading and reacting to a student essay. 5, planning a comparison and contrast essay. 6, writing the first draft. 7, revising the writing. And 8, editing the writing. So learning outcome 1, understanding comparison and contrast. Making a comparison is the most important form of analysis used to rank things. So comparison between things is the most important form of analysis. The effectiveness of any ranking depends on the points of comparison that are being made. Comparison versus contrasting. A comparison deals with the similarities between subjects. Contrasts deal with the differences. Be prepared to discuss this. Essays depend on the points of comparison that the author is trying to make. So this will also help you formulate the type of comparative and contrast essay that you want to write. Learning outcome 2, learning about reading strategies. Strategy 1, recognizing common comparison contrast patterns. There are 3 patterns. The first pattern is a point by point, and with the point by point, subject is added according to different points of comparison. So if you are comparing one thing in something, you compare the same thing to something else. So for example, if you are going to compare something as simple as apples and oranges, and your first point you're going to discuss is color. For one, you could say red. For the other, you would say orange. That's the same point under color. The next thing is subject by subject. This is where you discuss one subject in the first part and the other subject in the second part. So let's say you were going to use apples and oranges. Subject by subject, you would talk all about apples, make your points about apples, all within one paragraph. Then the second paragraph the second part is going to be all about oranges and match those same points, but all in the same paragraph rather than back to back like point by point. Then the next one is similarities and differences. Address similarities between the subjects in the first part and differences within the second part. So in this, you discuss all the things that are similar about something. So you were looking at apples and oranges. You can discuss how they are both fruit. They both come from trees. You can discuss that they're both edible. So those are things that you can say in the similarities. As far as differences, you can talk about the color. You can talk about the taste. So these are all different things that you can put within similarities and differences. Learning outcome 2, continue, is a visual structure of these. So point by point, subject by subject, and similarity and differences, they both have the same beginning. Within the beginning, just like every single thing that you write, you have to have a thesis statement. This lets the reader know what the focus of your writing is going to be and the points that you are going to make. That's the beginning. The only difference in all 3 of these patterns is the middle part. So within a point by point, you will discuss subject 1 and then subject 2 right after it, the point that you're making. That's why it's called point by point. The second part, you would have your point you're making about subject 1, then the point you're making about subject 2, and then for 3, the point you're making about subject 1, and the point that you're making about subject 2, and then you would have an ending. For subject by subject, again, you have a beginning, just like point by point, and just like similarities and differences, the difference is the middle. Subject 1 will discuss only subject 1, subject 2 will discuss only subject 2, and then it will conclude. The last one, similarities and differences, you will have a thesis statement again in the beginning, just like point by point, and subject by subject. The middle part will have all the similarities, followed by the next part, all the differences, and then it will have a conclusion, which aims to restate everything you've just told the reader as well as summarize. Strategy 2, recognizing comparison and contrast transitions. Watch for transitions or linking words that alert you to specific comparison and contrast. So for comparison, some of the words that a reader should see to let them know that this is a comparison and contrast paper is also, much like, both, in the same way, similarly, and likewise. Contrast, some of the words you would use are although, on the one hand, by contrast, however, and but. These are words that you would use to show contrast. Learning outcome 3 would be reading and reacting a professional essay. We'll do that in class. 4, reading and reacting a student essay. That also will occur in class. Learning outcome 5, planning a comparison and contrast essay. The very first thing you want to do, as with every other topic, select an idea. Which trait does that go with? Think about the 6 traits. Selecting a topic or selecting a topic, what does that go under? You want to also make sure that you gather details. A useful graphic organizer for this is which one? So which graphic organizer is best suited for comparison and contrast? When you're writing a thesis, you want to make sure, of course, that you've collected all your details for this essay. You want to write a thesis statement, and this should name your topic and identify important points of comparison between the two. Again, you are focusing on points of comparison. If there is no clear line that is a point of comparison, then the topic that you've chosen to compare and contrast is probably not a good one. A lot of people will want to compare different sports figures, Michael Jordan compared to LeBron James. It's good for conversation, but for an academic paper, it's not going to be the best, because beyond statistics, where else could you go? And of course you want statistics to help your claim stand, but beyond that, you don't want to give your reader a paper full of statistics. As you remember from previous chapters, a combination of supporting details makes the most effective papers. So this paper wouldn't be very effective because it would only have statistics. Learning outcome 6 is writing the first draft. When you're creating a first draft, put all of your planning into concrete form. So create an opening paragraph and understand that the aim of the opening paragraph is to capture the reader's attention and introduce your thesis statement. So again, if you don't have a clear thesis statement within your paper, you do not have a clear focus. And a paper that lacks a clear focus for the writer becomes an issue for the reader. So make sure you do have a clear thesis statement. So some things you can use to attract the reader. You can use a surprising statement. You can begin with a question. You can have a quotation, or you can share an anecdote. What is an anecdote? Be prepared to answer that in class. Develop in the middle paragraphs. Just like every other kind of organization, you do have to have a middle. The middle paragraph, they use one paragraph to address just one of the subjects, and the other paragraph to address the second subject. That would be subject by subject. You can use transitions, also have specific details for each subject, and arrange the details logically by location or by importance. So depending on what you're talking about, that will determine which one of these arrangements to use. Also, forming the closing paragraphs, which is your conclusion or the ending. The closing part of your essay should provide a summary, of course. You need to tell the reader everything you've told us again in a nutshell. It should also provide thoughts on the subject. Consider offering a final thought or idea about the subject or lend insight. These 2 things you must have within the paper. And learning outcome 7 is a revision. It involves adding, deleting, rearranging, and reworking parts of your writing. This often begins with a peer review. What is the purpose of a peer review? What is the benefit of a peer review? Make sure that you can answer this question. Adding sensory details. This helps you to show similarities and differences rather than just tell about them. So remember, this is not merely an informative paper. It is designed to show your reader what you're talking about more so than tell your reader what you're talking about. So remember, sensory details, they will show. Learning outcome 8 is editing the writing. The main work of editing is correcting your revised first draft. Again, when you have corrections made to your rough draft or your first draft, you want to make sure that you assess those corrections and make them if you need them. Other than that, you don't want to just turn in the same rough draft, because if you're turning in the same rough draft with no corrections, that means there was no revision. No revision means this is the same draft. So you want to make sure you make corrections, edit, and revise. Make sure that you're using correct subject-verb agreement. A verb must agree with the subject of the sentence, and the subject is singular, the verb must be singular. If the subject is plural, the verb must be plural. Sometimes in comparison, because you go from plural to singular within the same sentence, you need to make sure that things match if it's a multi-layered sentence. In the first part, if you were speaking singularly, stay singularly. If you switch to plural within the second part, separated by a comma, of course, or a semicolon, stick to plural. But you don't want to mix them up, or then you run into a problem with agreements. agreement with I and you. Sometimes I and you, well, most of the time I and you will take plural form verbs, even though they are singular. There is one I, there is one you, but it will be plural. If you said I run, it would be I run, not I runs. So I is singular, run is plural, but because I takes the singular form, it would be I run. This concludes comparison. Be sure to think about topics for your comparison and contrast paper, and be prepared to discuss some of the questions that were posed within this lecture.